What if you had no voice at all? Couldn't speak, couldn't sing, couldn't shout or sob.
The voice is the expression of the human mind and soul. It's our means of telling people what we want and where we've been and what we're going to do.
Well, you know you make me wanna kick my heels up and throw my hands up and throw my head back and come on now.
It may reveal aspects of health, age, emotion, and mood.
If we get lost, we cry for help. If we're hungry, we utter sounds.
It gives us the power of speech.
The gift of song.
Yeah, it can calm, it can anger, it can soothe. It's the most expressive instrument in the world.
We could turn jails into museums and build schools again.
The history of the world is all expressed through the voice. The production of speech and sound is probably what took us from Cro-Magnon man to advanced civilization.
I still remember when you used to be 9 years old. I was a fool for you from the bottom of my soul. Yeah, yeah.
There has to be contact between the vocal folds. Just like in a hand clap, I can go back and forth and you hear nothing. But the minute I
Now that you're grown enough and old enough to know, yeah, yeah, you wanna leave me, you wanna let me go.
Well, the entire muscular and skeletal system play a role in voice production. The voice is a very flexible thing, and in order to be flexible, you have to be loose. It's not dissimilar to a dancer who stretches before they dance, or a runner who does a warm-up lap before they run.
I want you to know.
For those who have muscle weakness or some neurological deficits, flexibility is important. But what else do we know?
When we think of voice in particular, we think of how closely it reflects emotion. We think of babies and crying.
I think that the voice can reveal the inner human, which is unique in all of us.
You know, Tony, too many people take their voices for granted. It's a shame.
The voice is one of the marvels of creation. Do you know how it works?
Of course I know how the voice works. Everybody knows how the voice works. How does the voice work?
Works like a car.
Like a car.
Like a car.
A voice is like a car because they both make noise. My colleague Brad Story actually worked for a company and designed mufflers, and I credit him with his analogy, actually, of the voice in a car. Both machines, the human and the car, convert energy from one type to another, from chemical to mechanical first, and then finally to acoustic energy. In the case of the car, of course, the source of energy is chemical energy from the gasoline. In the human, it's basically the energy from the muscles that drive the lungs and push air. In a car, the valves open and close, and we get big bursts of sound coming out from the engine. In the case of the human voice, the muscles around the lungs produce a force against the lungs, and then the air gets expelled, and the vocal folds begin to vibrate. The vocal folds are two small pieces of flesh that are in our larynx, in our voice box, and they have to vibrate in order to make sound. Not only do they have to vibrate there, but they have to collide in the process. Just like in a hand clap, I can go back and forth and you hear nothing. But the minute I contact the two together, then you start hearing sound. It's that sudden interruption of the air by making complete closure that gives us the many frequencies that we need in the sound.
We take in air through negative pressure developed by expansion of the chest, and as that air releases passively and we fix our vocal folds in a particular position, the vocal folds vibrate. Now, the pitch of that sound is determined by the speed with which the air flows through, and a couple of other factors, but probably most importantly is the tension on the vocal folds or the position of the vocal folds.
The mass and the tension and the elasticity of the vocal cords may cause different vibrations, and as such, the acoustic signal may vary. Sometimes people have simulated or attempted to measure this sound that's generated here, and what they hear is almost a buzzing sound. Not a nice sounding voice as we hear out here, but a buzzing sound begins here. And that sound then is shaped by the vocal tract, and resonant properties are imposed on that sound to generate a voice that sounds as a human voice does.
If you were to hear the sound of our larynx without the rest of the vocal tract, it would sound kind of not like what we're used to hearing.
Where shall I go? What shall I do?
Some of the sound that is initiated right here at the vocal folds should get out to the listener, but we want to condition it. We want to take some of its frequencies and downplay them or dampen them, and then we want to enhance some other frequencies. And so there's another piece in this whole similarity between the car and the human. What does the muffler do? The muffler is designed to condition the sound, if you will, like an air conditioner conditions the air. The muffler is made of a series of sections of pipe, and they expand and contract. This repeated expansion and contraction filters this sound and takes out the frequencies that we don't want. That does the same thing in the voice. The sound we produce is fairly dull by itself, but when you filter it with a vocal tract, some of the frequencies are reflected in and out, and they don't come out very well, and others penetrate right through. And that selectiveness of the frequencies then helps us decide whether it's an ooh or an ah or an e that's being said, or even whether it's one kind of a voice quality or another.
Well, the entire muscular and skeletal system play a role in voice production. The larynx really functions best if the laryngeal musculature can operate independently from the other muscles. And anything that will fix the larynx in a particular position because of tension in the neck or face will impact the sound that is produced at the larynx. The voice is a very flexible thing, and in order to be flexible, you have to be loose.
Voice is a whole body thing. You can't just make the sound and concentrate in one area. You have to prime the body to be ready for the best and most efficient voice production.
Think about where the larynx is located. In the neck are important structures that move the activity of the brain to the rest of the body. The spinal cord, neurological system, the arteries that provide blood supply to the brain, and the veins that pull the blood and the waste products from the brain.
The larynx literally sits in the middle of the main highway of all of the lifelines of the body. I don't know why our bodies were created so that right there where everything has to connect from the brain to the rest of the body, we constricted our body and made a narrow region out of it, and then stuck the larynx right in there. But maybe there's a purpose for it, and maybe we can get to that purpose. The blood passes through there. The carotid artery and the jugular vein are right near the larynx, all the major nerves. Of course, the air goes right through the larynx, and then the food that we take goes right behind the larynx. In one sense, that's kind of a dangerous situation, if you might say, but it's also a beautiful one because then the voice is able to encode all of that information that is constantly passed from the head to the rest of the body. All of those lifelines create little footprints on our voice. The muscle activity that drives all the muscles in the body is encoded in neural impulses, and they go right past, and in some cases through the larynx, and that leaves a little footprint. Heartbeat, the pounding of the vessels will also create a little modulation on the voice. And that's why the voice is then so telling about our physical condition. We can tell the state of mind, health, age, and so many things by just listening to the voice. The country doctors that didn't have all the fancy technology to make their diagnostics, and they had the black satchel and went to the house. But the main thing that they did is they looked at the eyes of the person, and they smelled the breath, and they listened to the voice.
In any language or in any culture, the adult male and female voice are pretty much immediately distinguishable from one another. That's even when people try to modify their voice to be more feminine or more masculine. You can still tell the difference between a man and a woman. You can't distinguish children's voices at all, particularly in babies. We can't distinguish babies' voices between male, female. Culturally, they're exactly the same. The cry of somebody in India is the same as a cry of somebody in the United States, is the same as a cry of somebody in Africa. And that primarily is because the cultural impact on intonation, sound production, language has not yet had an effect. At puberty, the male voice changes much more dramatically than the female voice, and that primarily has to do with a couple of factors. Number one is the hormonal effect on the larynx, and number two is some size differences that occur. As they get through puberty, the male larynx modifies. The thyroid cartilage that surrounds the larynx becomes much more acute. That's one of the reasons that the male's thyroid cartilage is much more noticeable than a female's. We have an Adam's apple, not an Eve's apple. In addition, there's some other hormonal effects. The mass of the vocal fold is much more greatly impacted by male hormones than by female hormones. So you have longer, thicker vocal folds at a different angle. And because of that, they vibrate more slowly, hence the lower pitches and tones in a male voice than the higher pitches and tones in a woman's voice. Now, when we get to the upper years, things change again. Particularly through menopause, there is a change in the female voice. Some masculinization occurs, again, because of a hormonal effect. In addition to that, the effect on the male voice changes. So we get some gradual masculinization of the female voice, and at the same time, the larynx in a man becomes a little bit weaker. The muscles don't contract quite the same. They become what we call atrophic, where they lose some of their bulk. And because of that, the male voice becomes much more feminine.
As we get older, get into 70, 80, 90, sometimes you can't tell the difference between grandma and grandpa. They have basically the same voice again, and it's because the hormone levels have decreased and that difference has diminished. We begin sort of with a unisex voice, and we end with a unisex voice.
My name's Michael White. I suffer from ataxia. Ataxia affects 150,000 Americans. It involves loss of balance, coordination, speech, eye gaze, that sort of thing.
Different parts of the brain control different parts of the activity and production of voice. For example, the singing and speaking voices are in two very different portions of the brain. Laughing is in another portion of the brain, any kind of spontaneous activity. And in fact, it's interesting to see that there are patients or people who have neurological disorders where they can't speak, but they can sing. And they can't produce any sound with trying to voluntarily produce sound, but they can spontaneously laugh, or they can spontaneously cry. So there are a number of places that neurological abnormalities impact the voice.
Clinicians who have studied patients with neurologically disordered voice have reported to us for years that they can hear a voice that sounds like a patient who has something like Lou Gehrig's disease or Parkinson's disease. But we've gone steps further, and we've actually done acoustic analysis of voices in individuals with neurological disorders and looked to see what were the characteristics in those signals that would tell us this person may in fact have a voice that is a reflection of Parkinson's disease or a muscle disease or something else.
What are you going to think about?
Loud,
Right. And how much effort?
8.
7 or 8. Okay,
Okay.
very good. Ready? Whenever you're ready, go ahead.
LSVT, or the Lee-Silverman Voice Treatment, is a speech and voice therapy program for individuals with Parkinson's disease. We've also begun to apply the treatment to individuals with other disorders, such as ataxic dysarthria. Parkinson's disease is a disease of the nervous system, specifically of the basal ganglia. Typically, the voice is the first sign of an individual's speech breakdown with Parkinson's disease. We hear a soft voice, a breathy voice, a monotone voice. Sometimes we hear imprecise articulation. We're working on exercises of the speech mechanism. We do things like maximum duration, ah, phonation. Highs and lows to exercise the muscles, and also using that loudness in speech production. And that's one of the exciting elements.
Couple more.
We see increased loudness and improvements in articulation and intonation.
What is amazing is that with very little effort, I can really project and pause and use my voice to control situations much more than I did in the past.
So it's as if loudness may be, in effect, a global variable that affects many levels of speech production simultaneously. And this can be extremely powerful when you think about treating an individual with a neurologic condition that may have problems with memory and learning and hence carryover. If you tell that patient to be loud, and that's the one simple single thing they need to use, they can take that outside of the treatment room and have an impact on functional daily living. And that's really what it's all about.
I still remember when you used to be 9 years old.
When did you first have trouble with your voice?
Oh, it was a long time ago, about 30 years ago it started. And I was smoking, see, and then I went to a doctor and he told me that if I stopped smoking, it might reverse itself, which it did. And the minute it reversed itself, I went out and bought another pack of cigarettes.
Don't overuse your voice. Try to use your voice in control. And don't do anything that's going to irritate a voice. Try to minimize screaming and yelling and those kind of things.
You learn how to take care of your whole body. It's a whole body health that you have to be concerned with.
And I abused the voice, and I didn't realize when I lost it. Remember, 4 years I couldn't even whisper. It's been a miracle that I've gotten this voice back. But it's so needless if you don't smoke.
Learn how to warm up correctly. With a lip trill, I could give you all the scientific reasons for it, but is a marvelous thing to get the voice going.
But I tell you one thing you've got to do. The minute you have a symptom, you've got to get help.
Live healthily, exercise, be strong, eat appropriately, because in the long run, those all have an impact on voice production.
It's a life commitment, and it's not just here, it's all the way from head to toe.
My heart bows down when I walk